All right. Welcome to another episode of We the Governed here. And this is a live stream Ask Me Anything here on a Tuesday evening. And my name's Glen Morgan. And if you haven't been on one of these before, welcome. Always happy to have new viewers and more questions that you might have. Again, it's an Ask Me Anything. That means you can ask me whatever you want. There is no guarantee that you're going to like my answer or that I'm even going to be capable of providing a reasonable answer, but I'll do my best. And we'll see where we go from there. Typically, I get all kinds of questions here. Just a quick reminder, just as it says up here on this little statement, if you do use @WeTheGoverned, it just, and there's no spaces, you got to make sure you spell it correctly. It'll just highlight the @WeTheGoverned. It'll just highlight that in the beginning of the question. It'll just be a little bit easier for me to actually see your question. Either, depending on what type of screen you're looking at, it could be down below or it could be on the side. Now, if you're watching this video later on YouTube, and it's long past the live date of Tuesday, the 21st at 6 p.m. Or 6 to whatever we end up at, 7:15, depending on what that time's going to be. Feel free to ask a question down in the comment section. I usually am pretty good about getting back to those questions as well. And I know we get about half of our viewers after the live stream tends to happen. So anyway, just appreciate everybody who's logging in and joining me for this live stream tonight. And I'm going to try to make sure I have my questions popped out here so that I can start to get to them when we're ready. Before I jump into those, and looks like I think I've got everything working okay. Before I jump into those, one of the things I usually try to do at the beginning of each one of these videos is just to give you some places that I'll actually be. As many people know, I do travel around the state quite a bit. And if you were out in Spokane on Saturday, I saw you at I might have seen you there at the Lincoln Day dinner. There were 550 people or so in downtown Spokane. It was a great event. I absolutely loved the speech contest that they did in the beginning. So kudos to the Spokane County Republican Party. That was actually a really great touch. You had some great speakers, but I really, for me anyway, the speech contest ended up being just amazing. Each girl that got up there to give their speech about the governed, consent to the governed, which is something deep, means a lot to me, especially since this is called We the Governed. And I was very interested in those speeches and the contest. That was really neat. Saw a lot of people that I know, a lot of old friends. I know we caught up kind of before and after the event. It was a long drive home after that to Spokane. I didn't stay there overnight, so a bit of a drive out there and back. But it's always fun to go to those Lincoln Day dinners, and I think I'm going to see many of you at various Lincoln Day dinners throughout the rest of the year. Speaking of which, actually, before I even get to that, tomorrow, which is the 22nd, I believe, I'm going to be at Trin Hahn's. She's running for the 8th Congressional District, which is kind of that district that is in Kent area, kind of wraps over the Cascades, goes in eastern Washington a little bit. And that's going to be at the Derby Restaurant in Seattle, 5:30 to 7. I'm anticipating being there. So if you happen to be there in the Seattle area and you're going to that event, I'll see you there for sure. I think I'll be speaking a little bit there. I just had a good chat with her when I was at the kickoff for the 30th Ledge District candidate recently, so it was kind of fun, and I talked to Trim for a while, and it'll be fun to go there and be there at that kickoff up in Seattle. However, after that, the next couple of dates, if you are going to join the No Kings protest, and it's the real No Kings protest, No King, No Ferguson, No King Ferguson protest up at the state capitol at noon on the North Lawn. This coming up Saturday, I will be there. I plan to bring my camera, take lots of photos. If you have fun signs, please make sure you bring them. No Kings, of course, as you know, this is the leftist socialist kind of group that they've been organizing protests all over the place, and they don't want to protest our own King Ferguson here, so we will do that for them. And that'll be fun later on that evening around, I believe it's 4 o'clock or so at Hangar 51. I'll be at the Lincoln Day Dinner, Thurston County Lincoln Day Dinner, where I am going to be the MC there. And so that'll be fun. If you just happen to be in Thurston County on Saturday, I'm bouncing between those two different events. There are other events I have coming up, but I actually ran out of time to write everything down beforehand. I was going to mention I will be in Idaho at the April 18th Voter Integrity Summit. Seth Keschel, Dr. Frank, there'll be a number of other people, probably hundreds of other people out there in Coeur d'Alene, or at least right across the Idaho border. I can't remember. I didn't write down where the actual event is, but if you start to Google search for that, you'll probably be able to find it. So I will be there. And I'll be very interested in seeing who's interested in that issue. With the recent Supreme Court case, where there is clear indication the Supreme Court may weigh in on the very questionable practice that Washington State's employed for decades now of accepting ballots weeks and even a month after the election and calling that good, even if those ballots are discovered secretly stashed in the trunks of election workers' cars or in secret stashes coming from other places in the community. And if those are no longer going to be allowed after the election, that's kind of a big deal, and it's worth knowing. So I do think that if the Supreme Court rules on that this summer and making that illegal, that's going to be a big impact on Washington State, even in addition to whether or not they're able to actually get their act together, get the SAVE Act out, and regardless of what happens with the Department of Justice lawsuit against Washington State's garbage voter rolls. So there are a lot of interesting issues going on right now all at the same time, all around the state. And obviously, probably many people are going to have some questions about the income tax as well, and that'll probably be part of it. Just as a real quick kind of more show background kind of issue, some of you might have noticed I've been putting out more short videos lately. And this is just something I meant to do a while ago. It just took me a while to catch up on this, just like it took me a few years before I decided to finally start doing live streams like this. Shorts didn't appeal to me a lot in this process, but I realized that different people consume information differently. And sometimes people want to hear small little clips of videos on very focused subjects. I'm still trying to get that down, that format down as well as I can. I'm not using teleprompter. These are simply off the cuff little scripts that I'm putting together, little videos. They aren't really scripts. So hopefully people like them. I've had a number of people come up to me in a variety of public settings recently saying that they do enjoy these videos. And it looks like thousands of people seem to watch every one of them that comes up. So I'll continue to do those for now. And you'll probably see, I'll try to launch maybe 2 of them a day, most days, just kind of moving forward. I'm usually able to record a few of them at a time and then put them out accordingly. However, one thing that I am very excited about, in addition to the other videos that we're trying to produce and do our best to communicate information to you about what's going on in Washington State, I am planning to have Representative Jim Walsh, who's also the chair of the Republican Party, in studio here, and you can kind of get a sense of how the studio is laid out. But I'm hoping to be able to get a better setup here where I can actually interview him at the studio. The studio is not super conveniently located. It's down in the Vancouver area, so not everybody has the opportunity to be down here. Some of the people I want to interview, a lot of them are up north or they're in Eastern Washington, but I'm trying to do my best to do some more of these interviews, so I know that we'll have Jim Walsh be our guinea pig, and we're planning to talk on a number of different subjects. It's been I think it's been over a year since I've interviewed him. And I'm going to do my best to get him and a couple other legislators in the studio as the kind of spring timeframe kind of progresses here and we start to get into summer. See if I can get some more of them in here. I think it's going to be interesting for people to at least get more of a long form style of interview. When I say long form, I mean 20 minutes or less, but a little bit more of an interview than a 3-minute soundbite on TV or radio, about the recent legislative session, some of the behind-the-scenes drama, what it was really like to be there, and just some of the other issues that I think might be interesting to people who are watching this show and this audience. If you have suggestions that you want to make for me of people that you would like to see me bring on the show in the future, I can't guarantee I can get everybody. It's not always up to me. Sometimes it's up to the studio schedule, and sometimes it's up to the schedule of the the interviewee, the people that I'd be trying to interview. But if it's possible, I like to interview lots of different people. That's always an interesting format, and I'd augment some of the videos I'd put out, and I've done these in the past, and I need to do more of them, I think. So I'd be very interested in getting more people in here, but I'm interested in hearing from you as to who you think I should be interviewing. I'm mostly interested in trying to interview people that are currently in office. I will try to interview some candidates. There's some Eastern Washington folk that I am way behind the curve on getting an interview with, and I've been meaning to go out there and interview. Obviously, they're not going to be able to make it to the studio very often, so I have to see about what I can do remotely in the field to at least do the best job I can to get some interviews out there as well. So that's just to kind of give you an update on things as well. And as it turns out, I am wearing an Air Force shirt here. Some of you know I do have a daughter who's at the Air Force Academy right now and a son that's starting there this summer. Listen, if you're familiar with what's going on in Iran, somebody has to be able to put those bombs on target, and looks like that'll be my kids in the near future. So that's just basically an update about what's going on. Let's jump into some of these questions. I'll see if I can get to them. And just a quick reminder again, just use this at We the Govern. Actually, it's funny, it's over here. At We the Govern. Try to spell it that way, and if you do, it'll pop up, and it'll be a little bit easier for me to spot your question here. And so the first question I have here is from Andrea1198. What are your thoughts on the theory that Fergie is delaying signing the income tax bill in order to shorten the time available to gather signatures for an initiative to repeal it? Well, I absolutely guarantee that's more than a theory. That's probably a fact. Remember, Ferguson is a pretty nasty guy, and he knows the game pretty well. And so I would say that one of the things he's always going to do is if there's a way to hurt you, Ferguson will find it and try to pursue that path. So if there's one thing he doesn't like, it's transparency, it's honesty, it's spending your money well, it's accuracy, truth. I mean, these are all the things that Ferguson just despises. And the last thing he wants is people to have an opportunity to repeal this absurd and ridiculous income tax. And as you noticed probably from the thumbnail of the video that I used here to put on, that I used for this live stream here tonight, there's a fuse that's been lit by the Democrats, and they just seem to be standing around the ball wondering what happens when that fuse gets to its end. There'll be a lot of consequences, most likely, for it. Most of them won't be good for our state, but I don't think they're going to be as good for the Democrats as they think. Unfortunately, one of the things that does tend to put them in a more lack of awareness, I think, sometimes when it comes to some of these policies, is that greed drives, it's power, money, and control, but greed is really one of the driving motivations. There's nothing more greedy than government. In fact, no entity ever created in human history is more greedy than government. And so government is rapacious. It's going to be relentless in trying to grab more power and control over all your money and resources they can. But eventually, of course, they hit the wall, they blow up. And the more you give them, the worse a government you get. And so the more things start to decline, the more things fail. And as those things fail and decline, sometimes you wake up an otherwise quite apathetic portion of the population who might not otherwise have thought about getting involved. Sometimes it's stunning, and I know this is hard to imagine, but there are a shockingly large, just an amazing percentage of the population that somehow thinks that the political fiasco that goes on all around us, that it has no impact on their lives. And this is understandable. It's normal. It's listen, most people, like I believe, they're more worried about whether they have a date this weekend, whether they can get together with the boys and go out drinking, whether their car's going to break down, whether they can get that roof fixed, whether they can get their lawn mowed, whether they can get the kids to the soccer game, whether they're going to get a promotion at work or get fired at work, whatever. Inevitably in life, it tends to introduce a much higher level of drama that seems much more immediate and significant to most people than anything going on in this distant kind of political world. The vast majority of people probably don't even think much about politics until an election rolls around. And so they're not paying attention day to day, the dumb and bad decisions that bad government makes, like Washington State or New York or Illinois or Massachusetts, any of the California, right? Some of the worst run states in America. So they're not paying much attention to that. But eventually they're forced to pay attention to it because if you're like me or anybody else who lives in Washington State, and you just got your power bills anytime recently, and you realize that the Puget Sound Energy is charging you 30% more, that the utilities across the board in the state are going to charge you 30% or more for using less power than you did before because of mandates imposed directly by Bob Ferguson and the Jay Inslee administration before him and the Democrats in the legislature. They can point at Trump all they want. They are 100% in control and ownership of the jacked up costs of power in Washington State. The Democrats have done everything they can to double the cost of the power bill to you and I, anybody else who lives here. So eventually these things sort of set in. I think it tends to be cost of living issues, so affordability. Sometimes if you happen to have kids in the school system, which is probably about 18%, depending on if you throw grandparents into the mix in a given community, it might be higher, like 20%, but it's somewhere in that ballpark, that you realize that your kids can't read or write or function in society very well, despite all the money that's going into public education. It's not educating the kids. They can't do math. They don't even know that it exists. And the school system's finding ways to dumb it down even more so that everybody's a winner, but nobody can read. So eventually, everybody has their moment that they suddenly wake up and realize that they can't sit back and pretend like things are just going to go on as before. There's a lot of apathetic, uneducated sort of people that do vote on a regular basis. It doesn't make them bad people. It just means they're caught up in focusing on other things. And I do think what we see happening right now in Washington State is that fuse winds down. Public safety, taxes, affordability, and education, or a failing education system, all these things tend to come together, and then people start to discover everybody's on their own time. You can want other people to discover it, just like you and I might know, but that's not going to be typical. They discover it on their own time. Everybody gets mugged for a different reason by government, and many people, I suspect, are going to be feeling the impacts very soon. Jason Fisher, 1530, question. Good evening, Glenn. Was the budget passed, and what surprises got tucked away in it? Well, the budget was passed. It's the one thing that the legislature actually has to do. The first and primary reason for the legislature to even bother showing up in Olympia is to pass the budget, which is why it's always the last thing. So the highest priority gets pushed to last, kicking the can down the road. It's part of the political process, and probably you can't be a politician unless you do that on a regular basis. And it's also not sexy or exciting, other than the grift and kickback schemes you can blend into the system. One thing that was thrown into at the last minute was a $2 billion increase in the state budget. Part of that was paid for by raiding the rainy day fund, which I had predicted they would probably do this legislative cycle. Also, what I did not predict was them raiding one of the pension funds for fire and police, because, of course. Why they don't raid the pension funds for the teachers and the public sector union workers like ASME or SEIU, I mean, that's probably coming in the future, but that hasn't happened yet. They'll raid those guys' funds later. And then, obviously, the tax increases. It was interesting. They went into this claiming they had this big deficit. They came out spending $2 billion more than they were planning to spend when they went in January. So I will point out most of that money, of course, is wasted and squandered. But the detailed surprises that'll get tucked in there, we'll probably find them out as we go along. Generally on the gun issues, and I know that, Jason, you like to track some of these Second Amendment issues like I do. Most of the bad gun legislation or the hostile to firearms legislation died in this legislative session. The Republicans actually did a pretty good job managing their pushback against that, and they killed all but one. The one thing that did make it through was the 3D printer, which is also kind of a First Amendment issue that kind of snaked its way through. And but all the others died on the vine this legislative cycle. In fact, a lot of bills died at the end. It's so many, it's hard to go through them all. But most of the bad bills, now there's some really bad bills that did get passed. Obviously, income tax, everybody knows about it. I think the bills that give, even if each bill by itself doesn't seem super significant, these little bills that give the Attorney General's office more power, they are not good. I would repeal those if I could. The other one was the making the sheriff an appointed position, or having the ability to remove elected sheriffs. That's not a good bill. That was another bad one that went through. I've spoken to numerous sheriffs around the state, and even some of the sheriffs that don't like each other don't like this. So this is pretty much universally opposed by the sheriffs, and even though they're targeting Keith Swank in that bill at Pierce County, they're really hitting all the sheriffs potentially. Adams County Sheriff's Skamania sheriff. Remember, the Skamania sheriff said he's sharing all of the or not, oh, Klickitat. The Klickitat sheriff said he was sharing all of the jail data with ICE. Adams County had the same issue, which is why the attorney general is suing them. A number of sheriffs are rebelling to some extent against the dumb state, sanctuary state sort of policies, and they don't want violent felons or criminals that are from other countries in their community. Whereas in Seattle, they love them. That's exactly who they're inviting. They want as many violent, illegal aliens as they possibly can get into their community, and they want to protect them and maybe have them go to the University of Washington or hire them at the state. So that's the kind of thing I'd be paying attention to. There's just going to be a lot of interesting drama moving forward. Now, there were a couple things, Jason. I'm going to take this as a moment to jump into some of these because I was a little late to the ball on this one video that did come out of Pierce County. And it was one of the funniest videos I've ever seen, actually. It was some Pierce County deputies that had caught just a scumbag criminal, 11-time felon. She was they thought it was a guy, but it was actually a girl. At least who knows what this person was claiming to be. But blue hair, nose rings, lots of tattoos, many times in prison, carrying a gun, with drugs, faking a seizure, and it was one of the funniest body cam videos that I'd ever seen. And it did go national, did go viral, and it put Pierce County on a map for a good reason, in the sense that criminals will not be treated there the same way that they are at the Evergreen State College, perhaps, or in downtown Seattle. So it was just funny. And one of the things they said, of course, is this isn't Seattle. This is not Seattle, right? As they're dealing with this crazy, delusional, nut job criminal who was trying to break into these homes. And by the way, one thing that wasn't reflected in that body cam video, but as a follow-up to the arrest of that criminal, then they went to her car that was just filled with stolen goods, of course. She was just stealing from people all over the community, and it was pretty typical. So good on the Pierce County deputies for arresting her and giving us a lot of good one-liners as they were roasting this absolute scumbag criminal there. So that was pretty funny to watch. The other thing I was going to mention is just today, I believe, might have been yesterday, that officially the federal HUD, Housing and Urban Development, has launched an investigation into Washington State's illegal and race-based housing programs that they have, which are obviously racist and have been for a long time. And that investigation is likely going to lead to Washington State losing a lot of HUD funding, which they deserve to lose. And I will point out that Washington State's trying to sue the Department of Agriculture over the fact that they have also cut off Washington State from a bunch of cash flowing mostly into the EBT, through the EBT cards for the SNAP benefits, which have been just absolutely plagued with fraud and plagued with non-U.S. citizens on those rolls. I'm sorry if this affects people who are real citizens and really deserving of that, but I'm going to tell you that whole program is so fraudulent. There's a lot of people at DSHS, which is the state agency that administers it, that probably should go to prison on this investigation. But we'll see what happens with it, and it's always interesting that the feds don't really, or that the state doesn't really care that the feds have exposed their fraud or corruption. They just care about their money because they certainly want more coming if it's possible. Jason Fisher, second question here in a row. Question, is it legal for King County to ban federal agents from their property, and who would enforce this? I don't think that that's enforceable, actually. That seems pretty silly to me. I saw the same thing you did. I think it's just a virtue signaling bill. Remember, the truth is irrelevant to the people that pass virtue signaling kind of woke bills. They don't care what the reality is. They just like the idea that they can pretend that they're doing something even if they aren't. And so that's probably, it really feels like and seems like it's one of those bills out there. Dapper Dan, 6325. Not a question, but you say you want me to interview candidates. I will try to interview some. I'm geographically restricted where I'm at right now, so not all of them are going to be able to come down here to the studio, but I will interview as many as I can get if they make sense. And I will see if I can get a roving studio set up where I can do some interviews like north of Seattle and in Eastern Washington and a few places as well. I'm going to do my best to do that this year. We'll see if I can pull it off. I'm kind of operating a charity operation here more often than not on a limited budget. And so sometimes I have to get people who are willing to set up cameras on the road. And I still want to have a reasonable level of quality when we're doing these interviews. I think you appreciate it. And so does anybody else who wants to see it, and the candidate will appreciate it as well. And so I still have to have it set up adequately enough that it's not like shaky cam in the car. But we will see and do the best we can while we're out and about in the field. Michael Case, 8231, another question here. With SCOTUS ruling about USPS not being held liable for not delivering the U.S. mail, will Hobbs be forced into having to dump Washington's mail-in only ballots? The answer to that is no. And listen, Hobbs will never willingly dump the mail-in voting system because he believes that he's obligated to perpetuate that system no matter how bad it is, because that's what Democrats need in the state. It's widely believed by Democrats that if they got rid of mail-in voting, that they would lose a lot of elections, a lot more than they currently do. And so that's their theory behind mail-in voting. Also, mail-in voting makes it easier for illegals to vote. It makes it harder for people to catch illegals voting. It makes it easier for ballot harvesting operations that are illegal in most states, but are legal here. It makes it easier to run those kind of operations. They're irrelevant if you have to vote in person. And so there's a lot of reasons why Hobbs will defend mail-in voting to his dying days and breath. He will never change it willingly. Now, again, the Supreme Court may come in with a variety of rulings combined with the SAVE Act, especially the SAVE Act passes, that will really make mail-in voting very difficult and highly unlikely to survive. At least it wouldn't survive in its current form. Even the recent Supreme Court case decision that's more relevant to this. I mean, really, going back to the SCOTUS decision that you talked about, and I did a video on this with the post office issue. The problem with it, obviously, is that we already have seen many examples of postal workers, either through incompetence, corruption, dishonesty, or failures on their part, that they're destroying the election system just through the failures within their own agency. And the U.S. Post Office has been a downward spiral for decades. We all know this. It's very obvious. Everyone knows this. Nothing new. But as they're spiraling down, it's one thing to have your bills get a little bit late, or your postcards from Europe show up that your kid sent, a year later, or that letter from grandma get mislaid along the way, or stolen by by that post office worker at the distribution center. It's quite another thing to have your elections plagued with inefficiency and problems because of the post office. And the bad thing about that decision was really it simply protects the post office from being held liable when they screw up. As examples I've given out in Renton and Cle Elum and Spokane and Eastern Washington, a number of the places around the state. Dapper Dan, 6325. How do we flip voters? Most people I come across simply don't care to see other perspectives. It's like leftism is their religion and the consequences don't matter to them. Well, I mean, there's different ways to look at different people. You'll never convince remember, somebody that's truly a hardcore leftist, that's on the left, it's a religion to them more than it is politics. That is their religion. Now, imagine if you're a religious person. Is somebody going to just walk up to you and give you some logical argument that's going to make you decide, oh my God, I'm not a Christian anymore, or I'm not a Baptist anymore, or I'm not LDS anymore, I'm not Catholic anymore, whatever it is. Nobody's going to realistically come up and do that to you. That is, at least mathematically, that's a pretty losing proposition. I remember when I was a kid, and I was in Christian school when I was younger, and one of the things, and I hated this actually at the time, the Christian school would get a bunch of us in a van for our youth ministry kind of event, and they would drive us down to SeaTac, sometimes up to SeaTac, sometimes down to South Center, with the instructions that we were going to go out and witness to people, randomly kids in the mall, and get them to become Christian, right? Or at least get them to come to church, maybe. And so it was one of the most ineffective programs I'd ever participated in. It was even worse than trying to go out and convince people to vote for your candidate and using a similar kind of format where they're doing something else and they don't want to be interrupted. Not once did I ever remember having a successful adventure doing that. Never had a new kid come to church. Never brought anybody to Christ doing that. That that was highly ineffective. Not the strategy I found to be successful. Doorbelling's a little different. I think you can make a little bit of progress at the door, perhaps, but even that is, I think, a big challenge. Kudos to those who traveled around and doing that. I am impressed. Now, I have doorbelled thousands of homes on political issues. And of course, it all depends on the approach that you take. Somebody that's really hardcore in opposition to you, that they believe that they don't see the world like you at all and that they're obsessed about something, you're just never going to change their mind. You certainly aren't going to have a logical debate that's going to push somebody into changing, most likely. I mean, every now and then that there's something different. However, you can always sow seeds of doubt in that process for people like that, the hardcore people. You can always ask questions that they can't answer. You can always make them think about something differently, but they're not going to change while you're standing there in front of them. They're not going to lose that argument. That's not ever how it works. All the activists that I work with today who were Democrats or socialists even a few years ago, most of them changed because something happened, right? They got mugged, they lost their job, they suddenly discovered corruption, they got red-pilled in some way that truly changed how they viewed the world. And when those events happen, when something like that happens to somebody, they usually don't change immediately right then. It's more of a gradual change that kind of occurs over time. I always think that if you're talking to people with whom you disagree, listen, treat them the same way you'd want to be treated. Discuss topics if they want to discuss with you. If they're going to get nasty and yell at you, there's no point in trying to yell back. You're not going to change anything. So disengage from that type of an interaction. It's just a waste of time. And they're not, there might be virtue signaling and feeling good about themselves, but you're not really getting anywhere there. It's more about the larger percentage of the population that wouldn't ever go to a Republican function, wouldn't want to go to a No Kings rally. They're kind of in the middle. Again, the way I try to describe life, because I've doorbelled a lot of thousands of people like this over the years, and they're not thinking about politics. They don't really want to hear about Republican or Democrat. In fact, most of them don't even realize there's an election coming up. They have no idea who's on the ballot. They don't know what the topics are. But if you discuss issues with them, that's where you'll sometimes connect with people in a very different way. So cost of living, affordability, taxes, crime, cost of their home, cost of their power bill. I mean, I would be pulling out everybody's power bill and showing them that 30% of that increase is a direct 100% easily tracked expense caused by Washington State Democrats in this state. Not because of Trump. It predated Trump, and it was exclusively the Democrats making these choices to jack up the cost of your power bill. It's worth showing that to people. They have to pay that bill. Same with your insurance, the reason why you're paying such ridiculously high insurance rates. Same with your car tabs. Same with your property tax. In fact, you can go right down most expenses that the average person's directly being impacted by and identify the policies that are impacting them. And I would doorbell on those policies. Sometimes you doorbell on people because you're doorbelling to hopefully convince them to vote for a candidate. And you really tie that into what's important in their community. So if it's the sheriff, that's easy. Prosecutor's usually easy. But if you're trying to doorbell for who your local county commissioner, city councilman is, or local representative, then you talk about the issues. Why do you want to vote for this person versus that person? It's not about Republican, Democrat. It's about, listen, this person loves increasing your taxes. They've done it 17 times since they've been in Olympia, or 57 times if they're your average Democrat. And they also believe that sex offenders should be released from McNeil Island and put next door secretly in that house over there. Maybe you disagree with that. Most normal people do. And they can't tell the difference between boys and girls in girls' sports. And they think that school districts should keep lots of secrets from the parents so that nobody knows what's going on with their kids at school. There's some basic things you can find common ground on. And remember, this coming up election cycle has a lot of, forget Trump and whatever's going on in D.C. This is really a local election in Washington, unlike many others that we've had on an election cycle. Trump is not the main thing on the ballot this year in Washington. What is on the ballot is this income tax. What is definitely going to be on the ballot are two initiatives. One is to restore some transparency in the public school system and to actually protect girls in sports. Those are pretty normal things that the average person, 85% of them, are going to agree with you on. You find your points of common agreement and work from there. You're never going to win with just big arguments. let's see. So flipping voters is sometimes just about getting voters to vote. There's some interesting data coming out, by the way, on the large number of Republicans that are refusing to vote in their district. And because they've decided not to vote, they have essentially put Democrats in power in about 10 districts in the state. It's absurd. And that's one of the changes that we do need to make. And that's low-hanging fruit. Those are people who agree with you, and they're just too lazy, too stubborn, whatever. They're not voting. So it does help. Name thing. So let's see. Larry W7 2X. Name one darn thing that conservatives have conserved. Well, it's very easy. In fact, that's an exceptionally weird question because it's not hard. You would have zero freedom of speech today if it wasn't for conservatives. You certainly wouldn't have the right to keep and bear arms because every Democrat in the state wants to disarm you and put criminals in your house. I would say that they've generally done a pretty good job on that, despite the Democrats' effort to do other things. But Republicans have failed to do, and this is conservative Republicans, is they have oftentimes accepted government at a higher level than it should be. And when they have been in charge, they have done very little to downsize government. Now, we haven't had that opportunity in 50 years in the state, roughly 50 years. And that's one of the things that needs to be changed. And when I say conserve, it means conserve your money. It doesn't mean conserve the stupidity of government that exists today. I think that's ridiculous. You have to recognize that a good percentage of what passes itself off as whatever grifting operation the government has today, that it needs to be downsized. So I'm not talking about conserving that. I'm talking about downsizing that. But conserving is more about conserving your money so that you actually have more of it and you can spend it however you want. Can't control how you spend it. You can spend it and waste it, but making sure that you aren't having it wasted and squandered by others that's taken by force from you. That's, I think, what's so important. If they get in charge, I've seen them do good things in local jurisdictions when they've been able to do that. When you did have conservatives take over the SeaTac City Council, for example, it went from a $5 million deficit to a $25 million surplus in just a few years, just by getting rid of the Democrats off that council and by not raising taxes at all. That's what happens when you elect conservatives. What happens when you elect leftists is they go and they blow that money and they jack up the taxes and they ruin your life. They just can't help themselves. They're addicted to that. Let's see. Moss and Fern, stop spending money you don't freaking have. Why is this so hard? Well, clearly you've never met a bureaucrat or a politician, lefty politician anyway, because they don't want to be told no, and they don't ever want to reform. They never want to fix things. All they want to do is steal more money from you so they can waste it. That's pretty much the definition of bureaucracy today, outside of the obvious definition that it's simply a mountain of corruption concealed by a notion of incompetence. And it's hard because they can't allow themselves to downsize themselves, right? They're never going to do that, so they're always going to fight against that. Let's see. Sigismundo Freud, 1536, a Captain Obvious question. Has anyone floated the idea of a SAVE Act ballot initiative for Washington? Yes, many times. There's a number of things about, and this is kind of interesting because the trend has changed. When I first looked into this on mail-in voting, making a ballot initiative about this, it would have been 10 years ago or something. And one of the things you do if you're a rational person and you actually want to prevail, then you run surveys to say, well, how does this issue stack up for average people out there? And the mail-in voting system itself used to be more popular. It's actually decreasing in popularity precipitously now. However, 10 years ago, it was more popular than it was now. It was actually popular among Republicans, mostly from the convenience standpoint. As things have been more exposed and problems have been more exposed now, certainly the conservatives and Republicans don't like it as much now. And the idea of not having ID is something that'd be interesting. The question is, how do you implement the SAVE Act in an all-mail-in voting system? Essentially, a SAVE Act does make it, change. It doesn't officially change mail-in voting, but it does change what it looks like. And if written well, there's probably some opportunities out there. Now, I've seen the Republicans have proposed they had an initiative that they were starting to run last year, did not get enough signatures. I believe that they're starting that again this year, and it's essentially harmonizing the state's law with the federal law, and it is essentially a SAVE Act for Washington State. But it will not necessarily by itself eliminate mail-in voting, although it would still be a big step in the right direction. Let's see, Larry W7Z2X, 70 million people. That peaked in high school. I don't know what that's referring to. Deanne M. Sanderson, can you do pre-recorded interviews by Zoom? Yeah, I could. And I might try to do some interviews that way. And, I tend not to like the way those look. The quality is questionable because it really depends on the internet connection that the other person has. But I may try to do some interviews that way. This is actually a pretty good studio to do that. And there's a setup here, actually. Not that you could see anything, but there is actually a setup back there that I could set up and be able to do it and see the other person that I'm interviewing with. So we'll see if I can pull something like that off. It's not as simple as it sounds sometimes. I know there's a lot of people that do it, but we'll see. I'll see if I can do that. Let's see. Somebody's saying I should be governor. No, I shouldn't be governor. What I should be is the guy who works for a real governor, because the governor's going to need a hatchet man. Somebody's willing to come in and radically downsize the state government, who actually kind of understands pretty much where the bodies are buried and what could be cut that nobody will ever notice, and how we can save a lot of money doing that, and which agencies and what ways they should all be cut, and what parts of those agencies are actually productive parts of government. Not much, but there is some. And so that's a tough job, and the governor's going to need somebody like me willing to go do it, because I absolutely don't care what anybody else thinks about that, and it needs to be done. Let's see. Larry W., no day off on election day, no mail-in voting. I see what you did there. I'm not sure what you're talking about. However, election day should be a holiday. That is one of the reforms that I've advocated now for a long, long time. And most people that are pushing for eliminate mail-in voting also recognize, and I think it's a good idea, to have election day be a holiday. The Democrats have always opposed this, and they've usually opposed it in the past because the theory was that if you were working and you had a job that actually meant you had to be in a place, that you were less likely to vote Democrat. So they never wanted to have a holiday. But now I think we've got enough bipartisan support for that, although the Democrats will probably come out and try to kill it again, that we could get it as a holiday. And getting it as a national holiday around the country, I think, would be a good idea. No mail-in voting, making Election Day a holiday is a really good idea. Now then, or this is a question from Now Then One. The people being discussed, not the same that our brave died for. I think what you're referring to is that the bureaucrats and the corrupt politicians that we talk about here all the time, that they're not the same people that the brave men and women, mostly men, who have died for America over the years. No, that's probably not what they were thinking about, saying I'm happy to hit the beach of Normandy so that I can have corrupt politicians like Bob Ferguson and Jay Inslee, and that we can have dumb, bad, terrible ideas like state income tax and other things like that. No, there's not a single person fighting overseas that actually thought that was a good plan. But they also recognize, listen, you get lazy at home and you're not paying attention to government. Government ends up distorting and morphing into the worst nightmare that you've ever had. You got to pay attention and grind away on it. One of the failings that I've had with my statement that I make, which is the future belongs to those who show up, and that's true. For clarity, though, it means those who continue to show up. It's not showing up once and the whole world changes like some kind of Sunday afternoon 2-hour special and all the world is better place, right? Butterflies, bluebird, and sunshine. Everything changes and then tomorrow's beautiful utopia. It isn't the way it works now. That's not the way it's ever worked, actually, at any time in the past. So I don't think, I think that's something that people have to kind of remember. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And not only is it a marathon, it's a marathon that requires you to pass the baton on to the next generation. Reagan said, right, liberty and freedom is just not passed down to the bloodstream. It is not an inherited trait necessarily. It is something that you continually have to maintain and fight. And I'm stunned at the quantity of people who claim to be conservatives and have some attachment to historical reality. And yet they somehow think that because it was done once, that it should just be that way forever, and that our freedoms are guaranteed and protected forever. They are not. To protect them requires eternal and consistent, continuous vigilance all the time. And that doesn't mean you need to go out and make videos like I do all the time, but in your own way, recognize that it isn't going to change without us being engaged and involved to fix things. And you can't maintain freedom and liberty unless you're willing to be engaged all the time over the long haul on a regular basis. And that's really what that means. Let's see. That's right. I got somebody in here who clearly doesn't know. Larry W722X. Yeah, obviously, I'm sorry. You just obviously haven't paid any attention to what the election system, how it works. Right now, you can register your dog to vote in Washington State, and nobody's going to stop you. And your dog can vote. I mean, this has happened. In 2008, lady, her only mistake was she was doing it to mock them. And when she finally went public after her dog voted using a paw print, then she gets charged because it made them look so stupid and incompetent. This has been going on for a long time. The only people who defend the current system are those who are shockingly ignorant about how it works or who support fraud. There is really no other way. It's as bad as it can get. Anybody can vote for you. And in fact, if I had your name, I'd be able to change the mailing address of your ballot, send it to somebody else, and they could vote for you. It's just not that hard. It shouldn't be that way. I disagree with that, and that would be illegal, but it's how things work. Jason Fisher, 1530. What is the status of the electric ferries? Yeah, this is another boondoggle in Washington State. The electric ferries, of course, cost a lot more. They're a lot more delayed than they were before. When they've had a couple of hybrid ferries that have kind of worked, but they don't work very well. They've had damage to the ferries when they've been trying to go back and retro them. The electric ferry is just a ridiculous. It's just a ridiculous program. We've known that from the beginning. It's a good way to waste and sink a lot of money, and I'm using the word sink because inevitably it won't be a good thing for the ferries that try this type of a process. So right now we're having to dump a lot more money. In fact, some of the Climate Commitment Act scam money is being diverted out of the Department of Commerce because it's just essentially a slush fund, right? It's not a real fund. None of that money is going to be spent in a significant way improving the environment, right? It just won't be. And instead, they have been throwing a bunch of that into the electric ferries. Anyway, Gloria Norton 2373 HUD, just the beginning of investigations. No, this is actually the end of the investigations. This is the lawsuit. And they had already started this investigation last year around February is when I first heard about it. And it took them this long apparently to get to when they're filing the lawsuit. I don't know that means, I don't know how much they've been doing already. Let's see. Diane M. Sanderson, can you do shorts in each policy that leads to higher cost of living? Sure, I can. That'd be kind of fun. Rather than endorsing a Republican candidate and someone closes their mind to having more. Anyway, I don't know what that. I don't know what the second part of that question is, but yeah, I think shorts on policies that lead to higher costs of living would be great. I don't mind. I've done a couple. Actually, I did a couple of shorts more on things you could cut in the budget that nobody will care about, like getting rid of Evergreen State College and Puget Sound Partnership, for example. Those are obvious. Or taking over. I did a video on the Department of Commerce. I don't know if it's launched yet, but it should be coming out pretty soon if it hasn't launched yet, about the Department of Commerce and changes you can make there. And I was going to go through some of these state agencies, but obviously, you have some that are unsalvageable, right? There's really no way to reform. It kind of reminds me when they were talking about shutting down USAID, and they said, "Well, we knew it was a can of worms, but it turns out it's just all worms. There's nothing else in there but worms. You got to just shut the whole thing down." And that's the Evergreen State College, right? That's obviously an embarrassment to education and shouldn't exist. It was an experiment in education that failed. And why punish and destroy the future opportunities opportunities and lives of the students who make the mistake of going there. And why keep on the jobs program for a bunch of unemployable people that probably couldn't get jobs anywhere else? Why waste your money hiring these retired politicians as some kind of a payback, kickback scheme? Yeah, Karen Fraser, I'm talking about you. Why? Yeah, it's just a waste. You have a decent campus there. You could do almost anything with it that would be better. You could turn it into a garbage dump. That'd be a higher quality use of that property. You could turn it into a homeless camp or drug addiction facility. You could just sell it in the private sector and have it be used somewhere useful. Anything would be better than how it's being wasted today. It's a beautiful campus. You know, I'm joking about the garbage dump. I'd rather not be used for that, but anything else would be better use than how it's currently being used. So that's an example. Save the money. You know, just get rid of the whole thing. Fire everybody. Obviously, I think there are people there who do good work. The janitors, some of the security people there, you know, the maintenance people. They actually have real jobs there. But the staff, you know, it's just a fiasco. And there's no reason. The bureaucracy, the bloated bureaucracy there is terrible. And remember, these are the same people that have killed students by sending them back into buildings after the CO2 alarms went off. You know, carbon monoxide alarms go off. They just send them right back in until the students died. This is the same. These are the same people that have endorsed all kinds of really terrible, you know, just a brutal environment that ends up producing dysfunctional people that can only be hired by state agencies. And it's led to the descent of the state agencies into a much lower quality of operation than the already low quality that they currently exhibited. Michael Case, 8231, when talking about getting people to vote, is it helpful to target groups that fail to vote or register yet don't vote? Thinking of the number of gun owners, yeah, I would. I mean, I don't know about gun owners specifically because you're not going to necessarily be able to differentiate that, but you can go up and identify people sometimes that, you know, you look at the vote rolls, you go to the House, you can tell, gosh, this is probably a Republican. I mean, not a, you know, you have no guarantees always, but I don't usually find very many people who are on the left side of the political spectrum who work on cars that indicate that they like hunting or anything like that. So there's a lot of things you can learn when you go up to somebody's house. They don't like to have kids generally, you know, or at least it's a little less likely. So you can learn a lot just by walking up to somebody's house and making sure they can vote and making sure they do vote, making sure they know why they need to vote and why it matters, even for these local races that are impacting them substantially. Remember, sometimes we have like 30% of the people in a given community will vote. That means that a huge number of conservative people aren't voting. And there's probably some crazy leftists too. Maybe somebody took the pot, you know, they're too high. They forgot about voting, but gosh, you got a whole month to, you know, get that ballot in under our current absurd system. And if we produce a real election with election day meaning something, and where you go in person, you have to show your ID. At least the people who care are going to go in and vote, and that does matter. Let's see, the Hudson's 8778, you need ID to buy cigarettes, weed, and alcohol. You absolutely should need it to vote. I loved voting with my mom at the polls for my first 2 presidential elections, and we made a party out of it. Yeah, I remember voting in person too. Listen, I'm one of the people that I was traveling a lot back in my 20s and for work, and I remember that I really liked getting the ballots remotely and mailing them in at the time because I remember thinking, oh, I can still vote, but I'm traveling in Ohio or Florida or something like that. I think you can always have an absentee ballot system that you sign up for and take care of remotely. But if Election Day becomes a holiday, now you're much more likely to be home, and it becomes a national feature of being an American, and I think that really does matter. So, let's see. Diane M. Sanderson. Okay, this is part 2. I think this is what you meant. If you want lower costs in area X, vote for the candidate that promotes policy X. Yes, or policy Y. Yes, that's a good idea, and that's one way you can promote your candidates. Let's see, Resmut Jeff. I know your rank and file progressive is either a well-meaning developmentally disabled person or an insane misanthrope, but what is their leadership's purpose of collapsing the West Coast states? Well, one of the challenges that socialism generally has, and this has actually been a challenge that has faced socialism from its inception, is that you can't create a socialist utopia without creating the potential scenario where the surrounding communities around you begin to thrive and your place becomes a hellhole. And so Democrats, which is really the modern socialist today, they really suffer from this because as they turn their captured jurisdictions into their utopian dream, like Seattle, for example, as it collapses and sheds people, right, suddenly Bellevue thrives and Kirkland thrives. And the political class in Seattle, they get mad because Amazon moves all of its businesses over to Seattle or to Bellevue, and Bellevue's obviously cleaner and nicer and lower crime and so they consider that unfair, and so they want to send their crazy people over to Bellevue so they can take over that city council and then harmonize their dumb policies of Seattle with Bellevue. Remember, it never goes the other way in a socialist mindset. And so they just can't help themselves because the utopian dream that they have, and it's based on a religion, not a political viewpoint, their religion of socialism, because it always destroys the community in which it's implemented, they need to basically try to take down all the surrounding communities that can be used as escape valves for the original community. And it's just their nature. It's innate in who they are. They cannot allow these other examples to exist. That's why you had international communism working hard to knock other countries down because they didn't want those other countries to exist there as a place for people to escape to. It's just the way they operate. They've always operated this way. And so and this is why they tend to be violent and they're more rapacious in their effort to try to expand. They can't allow examples of non-socialist sort of governments to thrive. They can't allow that. That's why people who think they can run away from this are just fooling themselves, because eventually there is no place left to run. And what you will find is they will come for you in Idaho and Wyoming and South Dakota. They're already there setting up. I see this in Montana. I see this in other places as well. Unless you start rolling it back in states like Oregon, Washington, California, and Illinois, and New York, and Massachusetts, and these other places, unless you start rolling it back, it just starts to spread because that's who they are. They get angry. You see California getting angry at Florida and Texas and Arizona for having businesses flee. So they go and they take over Arizona, which they're succeeding in some degree with Arizona and New Mexico. And then they're trying to take over Texas. They already took over Dallas, right? They're already succeeding in the cities there. And so you have this unusual fight back, and it's why you have to play offense and go after the places that are already left-leaning. Just like New York City experienced in the 90s when I was a student there. The left had pile-driven that city right into the ground, and it took Giuliani to get in there. Just one man, not a super conservative guy, but definitely a more conservative person than they had ever seen, who actually cared about the people who lived there and was familiar with the policies that had to be implemented to reduce crime, for example, and the economy as well. And a lot of things improved substantially. And that was in a city where 15% of the people were registered Democrats or were registered Republicans, and yet you were elected a Republican mayor multiple times, and it was successful. So I think that's one of the things to remember. So that's why they collapse the other states, and that's why they try to harmonize it. That's why Newsom has turned Ferguson into his little puppet, just like Kotek in Oregon. And Colorado, right? They go out and they don't want California to shed. Remember, California was losing a large number of businesses to Washington for many years. So California's mad. California's putting pressure on Washington. And then Washington needed a couple of really dumb governors in a row, Inslee and Ferguson, and they decided that they would kowtow to California and implement what policies that harmonized otherwise sane programs, or at least saner than California, and made Washington more attractive. So they're going to keep doing this to Idaho and all the other states that exist around the periphery, and they just keep going in. They'll never be satisfied. And it's one of those things. It's like understanding what the Terminator, it'll never be satisfied. It will never stop. They don't have reason. They don't feel remorse. They don't care. They will just continue until they've rapaciously devoured everything around them and then wallow in their own misery, and they'll be happy because they have political power. It is just how it goes. Moss and Ferns, it's really difficult to be a conservative and work for the state. Trust me. Oh, I know. I live in Thurston County, and I have a lot of friends that do work in many state agencies. Let's see, semi-country living at 30.95. I think Trump will push it as a national holiday executive order. Yeah, and I think actually that he could do that for Election Day, and it would make sense to me. Jason Fisher, 1530. Question: what's your thoughts on Washington State reports declining gas use in vehicle registrations? Well, okay, so those are two different things. I laugh quite a bit about the declining vehicle registrations, and this is clearly something the Democrats have brought upon themselves. It is funny that people are not registering their vehicles and they're just going around with tabs that have expired. I actually doorbelled a house one time. I talked to these people, and they had a number of expensive vehicles, and they lived in Pierce County, so they were just barely inside of the Sound Transit RTA, kind of the scam district that they were using to add pointless and abusive taxes on car tabs. So they're very expensive car tabs, and they ran the math, and they realized that if they got tickets, they were going to need like 9 tickets in a year before it would exceed the amount that they're paying for the car tabs. So they just stopped paying for car tabs. And then they said they went by now. They had 2 years. They hadn't been pulled over and got a ticket for it yet. So they felt like it was a pretty good economic choice and decision. And so I think that's funny. Now, the reduction in gas use is affected by two things in Washington State. Number one, obviously, just people are deciding it's too expensive, especially with the Democrat jacked up CCA cost on the fuel. Plus, we already have one of the highest gas taxes in the country beyond that. But the real hurt is the tax that's imposed by the CCA scam, which is fed through the wholesale cost of the carbon credits, kickback scheme that they have there. And so that is passed on to the consumers, and it adds maybe 50 cents to the gallon, give or take. And so the cost of fuel starts going up, and everybody knows it. So they just simply drive less. Listen, all of us do that to some extent. You decide, I have to drive around the state a lot. I don't have this flexibility, so I do have to pay the higher prices as I drive around. I have a complete total beater car. It gets good gas mileage, and it's really worth very little, but it's the vehicle I drive around the state in. And, you're still paying an extra $20 or $30 or $40 a trip more than you did before, and that adds up. Most people are going to decide, I'm just going to drive less, or I'll be a little bit more careful about how many times I go do the errands, or I'll get more groceries when I go to the store and only go once a week instead of twice. I mean, it's all these different decisions. Everybody's making these decisions themselves, and so that doesn't surprise me that that's happening. But the vehicle registrations are a little different animal, so I hope I explained that one well enough. Donald Darson, HS7DJ. Any pushback on the battery issue in Snoqualmie? Seems very dangerous and could affect water table. How does this get to the point with the supposed green energy emphasis? Oh, you're talking about like battery storage locations. Yeah, I am not a fan of the battery storage locations at all. Listen, it's okay if you want to build something like that on site with your data center, or many people don't realize that most telecommunication centers and now data centers have a fairly large on-site battery operation, mainly because of the ability to run a lot of the items on DC power, and then they have a power backup with like a generator or something there. And so if the power goes out, the battery's instant, really quickly, it's ready there, and then the generator can fire up and keep the batteries charged. That's fine if you want to do that for yourself. I don't think that's a good structure for a power grid system. It's a weak system and a bad one, but it's the only way you can justify the already inefficient, super expensive, and mostly ineffective windmill and solar panel system. However, if you're going to go off the grid and you want to disconnect from the current power grid that we have now, and after getting your Puget Sound energy bill, I guarantee more people will be looking at this. You inevitably have to kind of put together you can put together kind of a hybrid system if you live rurally, especially, where you can have maybe windmill, maybe that, or some kind of turbine system, and you could have some solar panels. And I have friends that have done this before, and they put it in, but they end up needing a battery for base load and the ability to feed into that base load with a generator, when the other two just don't, it's not enough sun, or there's not enough wind, or both. And it's a complex system. You can do it. Listen, it makes sense in some places. It isn't cost effective, but it does make sense if what you're trying to do is be off the grid and be independent. It doesn't make sense as part of a utility structure when baseload power is abundant and available in Washington State, and it's purely political policy that drives these kind of things. And I think they're pretty scams. And then the big problem, of course, is the fire hazard and the chemical leakage that occurs in these facilities when there's an earthquake or a fire, and it's very toxic and it's not good in the water table. And you're right, I would not. The Bess issue is just terrible. It's not just in Cedar Woolley. There's one not far from my house as well, and it's not a good thing. I'm disappointed that you deleted my Idaho comment. This is from the Hudson's 8778. Listen, I don't delete anything. So if there's something wrong with your comment, I never delete anything. Look, I'm not deleting anything here. So I don't know who would delete it. I don't even know what the comment was. So throw it in there down below. Or if you use profanity, I think YouTube will probably automatically delete it. So it depends on I don't know what the settings are in the comment section here, but I don't delete anything. So it's not me. The criminals responsible for electric ferries belong in prison. Yeah, instead they're going to give them a pay raise and put them in charge of the ferry system, most likely. Jason Fisher, 1530, question, what's your thoughts on Washington bans retail sales of nitrous oxide? Oh, that's right. You know what? I don't have a strong opinion on this. I mean, the problem with this kind of stuff, this has come up before. This came up in the 90s for a while. Huffing, you might have heard about it back then. I just remember because I was doing computer accessories, and people were using it to displace oxygen, essentially. And anyway, there's all kinds of different bans that they'll have on this stuff. I don't really know how they would totally control that, but there's always going to be some new boogeyman, and they're going to try to ban it, and then later on down the road they reverse it. Whatever happened to conservative Democrats who supported freedoms, the working class, and common sense? This is a question from BB46. Well, those Democrats are long gone, and they become Republicans. Or at least they've become independents, one or the other. They are certainly no longer allowed and accepted at all anywhere in the Democrat Party. I work with plenty of activists that used to be Democrats not that long ago. They were going to Democrat Party functions. They were maybe on the more conservative spectrum over there. But it's like trying to find a Democrat who believes in the Second Amendment or freedom of speech. Or now, when I say freedom of speech, they'll want freedom of their own speech. They don't want freedom of anybody else's speech. So true people who believe in freedom of speech, even for people that you disagree with, they're gone. They are not allowed in that party. They've been chased out. They're destroyed. If they ever get into a position of power within their party, they're absolutely destroyed and taken out for sure, more aggressively than even they fight against Republicans. And that is how Democrats roll today. I mean, it used to not be that way. I had a couple of Democrats who were in the legislature I used to work with on different policy issues in both the Farm Bureau and with Second Amendment issues, and they are long gone. There's no one left. At least no one like that. Maybe that could change in the near future, but it's not going to change. I should say it could change in the future. It's not going to change in the near future. Sharon Milligan, 7560. Are the property sales going to crash if the high rates collapse? Good question. The things I think that could affect property, I don't know that. I think property sales are sort of flatlining a little bit right now. So if you have property taxes go high enough, it kind of depends on mortgage rates clearly do impact property sales, but we'll see where it goes from there. I would be watching for property sales. But what happens is, even in places like Boston and New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, even terrible places to own and buy property, with all of the terrible things that happen there, they do tend to sell. Now, there's fewer people that can afford to buy them. There's a little more corporate sort of purchases there. But, they will find times that they get sold and purchased even in places like that. So we'll just have to see. Let's see. Donald, I think it's Donald D. Larson, HS7DJ. Is the Constitution law? And if so, what is our recourse against Ferguson? Can there be citizen arrests or something? I've never seen the citizen's arrest theory ever really work well in practice. I mean, I'm just going to be honest with you. People have talked about that endlessly, time after time. about trying to do some kind of citizen's arrest, and it seems like a pipe dream and not something that's terribly realistic as a practical course of action for anybody I've ever met. But anyway, there's so I don't find that to be a super effective strategy ever. If it was, you would see Democrats doing it all the time to Republicans, but they don't because it just generally isn't. Michael Case, 8231, since it's early enough, and it is March, could we get a video that encourages vetting midterm candidates? Oh, okay, that's a good suggestion. I like that idea. Michael, thanks for that point. I don't mind doing something about vetting candidates before filing week. Remember, May is filing week for candidates. And up until then, it's all silly fun. But once you say that you're going to run for office and you don't withdraw, then you are committed moving forward. At least you're going to be on the ballot. Jason Fisher, 1530. Question, will Seattle get an NBA team? And how do you attract players with a millionaire tax? And the answer to the first question is probably not. And it's going to be harder for them to attract players. They actually have to they have to pay a lot more. I mean, it's not totally impossible, but the threshold has been raised, and there's other places they can go. They don't need to come to Seattle. So I do think that's one of the things that Seattle will happen. And if you actually think there's any Democrat in the state of Washington that actually cares about that issue, I think you're kind of not paying attention to who these people are. They don't care about that. They'd be happy if all sports teams left Seattle. Their presumption would be then that would mean that more Republicans would leave Seattle. So they just don't care. That's nothing that they care about. It's like you going up and telling your local lefty city council, oh, I'm going to move because of your stupid taxes. They're happy. They know you're not voting for them, so they don't care what happens to you. So that's the kind of thing to remember when it comes to these lefties and progressives in government. So with that, guys, I got some more video work I'm going to try to do if I get my act together tonight and finish. I got a really fun video I'm working on right now, and I'm trying to finish it up this evening and get it filmed so I can launch it for you tomorrow and maybe Thursday at the latest. It's a good one, so I'm eager to get it done. Thank you guys so much for logging in and asking questions for another Ask Me Anything. We had, it looks like about 1,200 some odd people who came on to the program today, so that was great. And like I said, there'll probably be another couple thousand, maybe another 1,000 or so that'll look at this live stream later. If you didn't get on this live stream to get your question answered that I could see it, feel free to put those questions in the comments section down below, and I do try to get to those as soon as I can. If I'm going to see you the next couple weeks, I look forward to seeing you at one of these events that I'm at, maybe this weekend at the No King Ferguson rally, right across from the other paid No King protesters for the left, or at the Thurston County Lincoln Day dinner where I will be the MC, or at some of these other candidate kickoffs events that I plan on trying to get to tomorrow. Listen, there's a lot going on right now. I'm going to do my best to cover as many of these topics as I can in the course of the next few months or so. Always like your feedback. Thank you for sending me those. Any kind of feedback on videos you think that you would like to see on topics that you'd like to hear from me on. I will continue to try to do my best to do a better job getting more topics out there, more videos produced. So, and I'm encouraging you to look forward to, they'll probably go live over this weekend, some of the interview videos that I'm planning to do with Representative Walsh and with other legislators shortly after that. So just remember, as I close this video out, as I always do, the future does belong to those who show up. But it means you have to continue to show up, not just once. It means you show up and you continually show up. Ultimately, that's the staying power. It's a marathon, not a sprint. That's the kind of thing that ends up changing a community. And although the Democrats have lit the fuse, I don't think they're totally prepared for the consequences of their actions. And when things don't quite go the way that they're planning, then it's up to people like you and myself and others who are willing to actually engage and do something about it. But the future does belong to those who show up. Thank you guys for showing up tonight, asking those questions, and we'll see you next time.